This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
It's always a good day when teachers are texting you at 10:30 p.m. to ask business-related questions. It's why I love my job. Never a dull moment. So what's going on with you guys? Everyone hanging in there? If you live in some of the colder climates of the country or the world, hopefully you're surviving the tragic weather. It's finally reached uncomforting cold levels here in Pittsburgh, to the point where now schools are actively calling delays in the morning. That's when you know it's serious in PA. When public schools are doing 2-hour delays and or cancellations. Of course, with online virtual learning being a thing now, that's completely changed the landscape of how everything's done. But enough about my struggles. Got plenty of struggles to get through today. Actually, we really don't, because we're not talking about Retro Raw. No, today we are talking about the classic 80s wrestling. Got Crockett, Midsouth, and World Class that we will get into momentarily. As always, do me a solid for the show. Subscribe, comment, all the good stuff. Like the video. I don't think I need to beat a dead horse over the plugs. We're on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday. Going strong on 2 full years on this channel. I've been having a good time with it. Even through all the struggling periods of trying to get through those AEW reviews and some of the WWE talk, depending on how bad SmackDown was most of the time. I've not reached the point yet where I am contemplating throwing in the towel with SmackDown. But that'll probably be the next on the chopping block if I do decide to cut something. Because I'm having a ball with everything else. Well, there's a caveat that comes with that. I did not have a ball with Crockett TV this week. I tell you that much. And, you know what? Let's get into it. You'll see why as we run down the show. So as we go into the program this week, our opening VTR is the replay of the Big Brawl angle from the previous week, following the Arn Anderson-Ronnie Garvin TV match, which was good news for me because that meant I got to see J.J. Dillon's notoriously comical selling again. You know, I also really didn't take into account at the time just how hot the crowd was for that fight. Like, I remember mentioning how people were really into it, but hearing the reaction again on replay, it was more deafening than I remember it being. And man, when you compare that environment to the Atlanta studios, which is where they were back for their taping this week, man, the difference between that studio setting versus a giant arena filled with rabid fans. It's why I always say the syndicated tapings look so major league when you see and heard those thousands of people in the crowd. The people that would shit a brick during a Barry Windham squash. Not even with somebody good, like just some ham and egger that they lined up from that week. Like even the squashes mattered more. But we are back in Atlanta this week, and we kick it off with Barry Windham and Sting versus Alan Martin and Tommy Angel. Coincidental that I just mentioned Barry a minute ago. Yeah, I forgot he was in the opener this week. It was also one of the few times I think we ever saw Barry and Sting team together, at least from what I remember. Because not too long from now, they turned Barry heel and then aligned him with the Horsemen. And I don't think Barry turned face again until like 91 or 92. So if you are a fan of the makeshift Barry Windham Sting combination, enjoy the Bleach Blonde duo, because it doesn't last long. Match was harmless enough. Nothing looked particularly bad. Sting shot Martin off the ropes at one point and then gave him a back body drop onto his tailbone, which did not look pleasant. And I think Sting pulled him off the mat as a shoot, because I'm pretty sure Martin was going to stay down for the pin. Aside from that, though, they just did like 47 moves in a row until Windham set up Martin in the corner for the Stinger Splash. And then Sting submitted him with the Scorpion. And then they both did a promo afterwards, letting Tully and R know that they're ready to go after the NWA World Tag Team Championships. Because apparently Barry and Sting decided, well, you know, we got that one TV win. I think we're ready to go after the top dogs. Seems logical enough to me. My only takeaway from this was Barry informing the people watching that he and Sting were, quote, doing all kinds of things together to figure out their chemistry as a tag team. And then to make matters even more creepy, right as they're about to wrap up their promo, Sting tells Flair that he's hot on his trail and that all three of the Horsemen are about to feel a lot of the problems because Sting feels it too. So what to make of this? What are Tully and Arn going to feel exactly? Anal probing? Perhaps a little scorpion in the anal cavity? Not to immediately bring inappropriate sexual jokes into the matter, but come on. It was right there in front of me. Barry Windham's talking about the things he and the Stinger were doing together. I mean, he left the door wide open. It was an easy target. Ladies and gentlemen, the unfiltered male brain, brought to you by the Five Starr Wrestling Report. So then we had the Midnight Express in a match with Lee Peak and Mac McGiver. And at the moment the bell sounded and ended for this match, I swear to God, at least 3 days had passed. It was the longest match in the entirety of the 80s. Like Bobby and Stan are just beating on these guys for an hour. There were a couple moments where I chuckled just watching Bobby and Stan play around with these guys like complete tools. And then after seeing it for about 5 minutes, I was kind of over it. I wasn't even really tuned into what Cornette was saying on commentary, and I remember I usually remember at least a couple memorable phrases during Corny's tirades, but here I just got blanking out. I did like the spot early on where Bobby let Pete give him a few arm drag takeovers, and at first Bobby was being all sportsmanlike about it and high-fiving Peak. Like, yeah, man, good job. And then they did it like 2 more times, and then finally Bobby just kicked Lee Peak in the gut, threw him out to the floor. That was funny. The only other thing I wrote down was the finish, where Stan and Bobby were setting up Peak for the Gravedigger, and right before Bobby came down and had Peak pinned like he was fucking him, Stan also gave Peak a little slap on the ass. So at this point, we are now less than 20 minutes into the show officially. We have now seen a segment where grown men were joking about doing things together behind the scenes, as well as warning other grown men that they're going to feel the hurt. And we've now also seen a live TV segment where grown men in their underwear were actively patting other grown men on the ass and then pinning them down in very questionable manners. You know, of all times for them not to put up the graphic warning message on Peacock, someone dropped the ball here this week. And then following that, we had a quick Midnight's promo where Cornette was trying to belittle the Rhodes family, making fun of his sister, his daddy, his mother, the whole 9 yards. No mention of Dustin or Cody, oddly enough. But he basically called Dusty's sister a tramp, said that his father was a loser who was too busy shining shoes and cleaning toilets to ever know what real class and real fortune looks like. It's pretty typical heel stuff. And again, the whole idea here is that while the Midnights are sitting back and waiting for a set of credible tag challengers to wrestle them for the U.S. tag belts, they're going to be going after Dusty and Nikita for singles gold. Bobby's going to go after Dusty in the U.S. title and Stan presumably the TV title. Just sort of a way to keep him preoccupied until the Fantastics show up. Then we came back for Nikita Koloff versus Jeff Cruz. They go about 2 minutes and Nikita won with the sickle. Every single copy and paste Nikita squash you've seen on television for the last 3 years. Literally nothing else to say about it. Nor did I have much to say about his post-match promo. He basically told the Midnights that if they want to be USA and TV champion, they can sign on the dotted line and the superpowers will be ready. He also called out Mike Rotundo, saying that he's let Kevin Sullivan get into his head. So they're already getting the ball rolling on that feud. I think I've already kind of spoiled what ends up happening here. Like the whole thing with Nikita dropping the strap to Rotunda soon. And I'm pretty sure that's the last we see of Nikita for a while until he comes back during the 88 Crockett Cup season to wrestle Flair for the world title. Again, a lot of personal issues he had going on at the time. And I think this was right around the time his wife started getting sick. Because he took a couple months off to be with her, and he wasn't around for a while. Then by the time he came back, he'd completely changed everything about his appearance and kind of started phasing out of the business entirely. More on that for a later date. And then we had what I coined one of the worst attempts at a pay-per-view plug in the history of wrestling. I don't even know where to start with this. Well, first off, let's establish a baseline here. For all you newbies out there that are not familiar with your NWA history, at this point in the timeline, the network was heavily pushing Jim Crockett to compete and run up pay-per-views against Vince McMahon. And we've already covered the Starrcade 87 debacle and how they tried to run it against Survivor Series and they were completely stomped on by the cable providers. Well, that trend actually carried on into early to mid-88. They gave it a few more goes. After having failed the first time around, trying to run head-to-head with Vince on pay-per-view, well, then the NWA tried to do the same thing here in January by running the Bunkhouse Stampede against the Royal Rumble in New York. This also quickly blew up in their face. Okay, so as they come back from break, Tony Schiavone and David Crockett are trying to explain to the viewers how they can call their local cable provider to see how they can get access to buying the 88 Bunkhouse Stampede on pay-per-view. The date was January 24th. I believe David's comments were, quote, "If you live on the West Coast, it's a different time zone. So, well, just call and find out what you're supposed to do because we don't have a fucking clue." It's the worst pitch for a pay-per-view event I think I've ever seen. Nobody knew what the hell was going on. And then if that wasn't bad enough, then they spent like another 5 minutes running down the injury reserve list for all the people that were taken out of the Bunkhouse Stampede finals. By the end, it sounded like we were talking about AEW's roster. Well, with all the goddamn injuries going on. They mentioned Rick Steiner was going to be out of action with a knee injury. Ricky Morton was going to be out, which I think was mostly a kayfabe explanation to write him off TV entirely. Now, the only injury pre-tape they showed here was for poor old Mighty Wilbur, who I believe legitimately blew out his knee, taking a bump during one of the bunkhouse matches in the Omni. Required surgery. So they show him cooped up in a hospital bed, explaining that he just had knee operation done. Also operation done on his left hip, I think he said. He looked like death warmed over. Laying there talking about how sad he wasn't going to be able to wrestle. And honestly, I cannot remember what the hell happened to Wilbur from here. For all I know, this might have been the way they wrote him out of the company. Because after that whole Paul Jones Army experiment, I mean, it was clear they had no story direction for the guy. Yeah, they were trying to give him a little bit of a push during the bunkhouse deal, but, you know, that never really went anywhere. So even if the injury was legit, they might have saw it as a blessing in disguise. Because I don't know if Wilbur ever returns. This might be the last time we see him. And if that's the case, boy, is that a rough way to go out. That's the proverbial don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out treatment. But yeah, that was my general takeaway. Bad pay-per-view plugs and half the roster getting crippled in bunkhouse matches. Then we went back to the ring for the Barbarian versus Steve Atkins, which the Barbarian won in about 60 seconds with a diving headbutt. My favorite moment here was Paul Jones on commentary saying, "My men are capable of bench pressing 700 pounds. There's a long, dramatic pause. Then he finishes by going, "That's 350 pounds apiece." So let it be known, your Paul Jones math lesson for the week, kids. 700 divided by 2. It is indeed 350. And they say wrestling is for outlaws. They say there's no education in wrestling. Liars. God, Paul Jones. He was so bad, yet so amazingly great at the same time. And after 3 years of watching him on the show and doing these reviews, I still can't settle on whether or not I love or hate him. It goes back and forth. And then we went to a VTR for some pre-taped Ric Flair comments. And here's what the Nature Boy had to say this week.
Wing!
Oops, sorry. Wrong clip. No, it was actually a pretty serious button-down Ric Flair promo for a change. I think it's the first time we're hearing him call out Luger, too. He talked about how the Horsemen represent the 3 greatest world champions in the sport of wrestling today. When it comes to Luger, the only thing he ever proved along the way is that he's a nice guy with a great body. But he's not a Horseman. He, Tully, and Arn tried to make Luger into an all-time great. Tried to take him under their wing, teach him, mold him. But Luger didn't have the passion or the drive like the Horsemen did. He didn't party enough on Fridays. Says there are plenty of guys out there trying to prove they're on the Horseman level, including Michael P.S. Hayes. And all Flair wants Hayes to do is try to prove that he can stand toe-to-toe with the Nature Boy. Pretty good stuff. It's almost very out of character when you see Ric Flair act normal on camera. He's also one of the few men I've ever seen sport a light blue blazer a blue dress shirt and a pink pullover sweater and still look like $1,000,000. But I guess that's what made Flair head and shoulders above most men in the sport. What a cat. Then we had Ron Simmons versus Dave Isley. The new longest, most boring squash in the history of the 80s. Right next to that midnight squash I watched about 20 minutes prior. And I like Ron Simmons, but I mean, there really just wasn't anything to say about it. He did 75 moves in a row to Isley. No sold anytime Isley would try to fire back on him. The announcers were dead silent the entire time except for one moment where David Crockett finally chimed in with, "Look at him." Then finally Ron won with some kind of awkward wheelbarrow slam off the ropes. I had honestly completely forgotten Simmons was even on this show. That is how little information I retained after watching this segment. Just another textbook example of, hey, check out this former UWF guy that we signed and have no idea what to do with. You know, they eventually figured it out with Ron. Only took him until, February or March of '89. Now, with that said, I like the little seed they planted during his post-match promo, talking about how before his mother left this world, she instilled values in Ron to fight for what he wants. And when his time comes, he's going to fight to become the first black NWA World Champion. And what a teaser that was. And you could really sense the passion in the delivery. And even by this point in '88, only a few years into the business was Ron. But the guy had the promo ability down packed. Maybe a little rough around the edges in the ring still, but man, could that guy cut a promo. It was almost as good as Dusty's promo. You know, sometimes Dusty had a rare misfire where you listen to him talk and you think to yourself when it's over, wait, what the fuck did that guy just say? This is one of those classic Dusty monologues where he gets out the business side of things pretty quickly. You know, he addresses Midnights and Cornette, says that they're picking a fight with the wrong men if they think they're going to just swoop in and take the TV and the U.S. heavyweight title from the superpowers. Talked about how 1988 may be Dusty's last swan song. And if it is, he wants to make sure that he establishes a legacy that nobody forgets. So he's going for broke, Daddy. He's going for it all. He's going after the money, the power, and the world heavyweight title. He knows that Flair's got a lot of people breathing down his neck right now. And since Dusty is the current U.S. champion, that means he's got first dibs for a title shot with Flair whenever he wants. A seat at the front of the line, Daddy. By the way, sidebar here. A lot of early seeds being planted for things to come later on. In essence, Dusty ain't lying. This is, in fact, his final calendar year with the company on a full-time basis before he gets fired in early '89. I don't know, maybe he was hearing rumors behind the scenes from the executives, but it's a very eerie thing to be calling a year in advance. Maybe Dusty saw the writing on the wall. But after Dusty gets through talking about his game plan for '88, he then gets cute with Cornette by saying, "You remind me of a feminine woman." Warning Cornette that he can make fun of Dusty's sister all he wants, but she's 6'2", 250 pounds of butt-kicking power, and she will eat you for lunch, Cornette. Says that when Dusty hangs out with the boys after the shows, he likes to go drinking and have a good time with the ladies. When Corny goes to hang out with the boys, he can only wonder what goes on behind closed doors. Then we get that classic nod and wink at the camera as Dusty walks off set with that American Dream swag. Now, of course, I can never do the delivery justice because I'm not Dusty. But that line about JC being a feminine woman, I think it was the intonation that got it over with me, with the lisp and everything. But the little smile right at the camera before he walked off, that was pretty awesome. Then we had Larry Zbyszko versus Cougar J, the segment that featured my all-time new favorite heckling chant, where half the people in the crowd were chanting, "Zbyszko is a wimp," followed by the other half of the audience screaming, "Wimp!" to the top of their lungs, just to reinforce it. Zbyszko is a wimp! Wimp! Zbyszko is a wimp! Wimp! I think it was the double emphasis on the word wimp. Just in case we didn't hear it the first time. Hey, I heard Larry was a wimp. Beyond that, we had 3 minutes of Larry stalling and yelling for the fans to shut up. Some people were chanting for Barry Windham. And then Larry eventually won over with the swinging neckbreaker. Really nothing else to add. Enter ring, stall, yell at fans, neckbreaker, 1, 2, 3. It's every Larry Zbyszko match we've seen in the last 3 months. Or perhaps his entire career, if you think about it. Then we came back for a Larry Baby Doll promo at the booth, where Larry pretty much said he doesn't have time for all these spudheads chanting for Barry's name. He's ready for the Nassau Coliseum so he can beat Barry for the Western States Heritage title. A belt that purely exists in name only. And then Baby Doll chimed in with some stuff. I couldn't hear her over the screaming fans. Which then took us back to the ring for the Lightning Express versus Trent Knight and Bob Riddle. This was the point in the show where I wrote down, someone needs to justify to me why the show needed to go 90 plus minutes this week. We have seen virtually nothing of intrigue for the previous hour, outside maybe a couple good promo lines. We are now closing in on hour 2. I'm watching Tim Horner and Brad Armstrong bore the brakes off of me for 15 minutes with chain wrestling. And again, it is nothing against Horner or Armstrong, but 50-something minutes into this nothing happening show, the last thing I wanted to see was more boring ring action with underneath guys. I nearly screamed when this segment came up. Here are my notes. Tim and Brad did 50,000 double team moves in a row and then one was some kind of double assisted leg drop combo. It was fine. There was nothing wrong with anything that happened. But the moment it ended, completely wiped it from memory. So at this point, we came back for one of the featured segments they hyped up for this week. The PWI Awards for 1987, hosted by Bill Apter. They had him out with Tony to present the awards to the various wrestlers from all the different categories. And again, this is back when the end of the year awards in wrestling were not a complete joke. And they didn't create a bunch of arbitrary categories so the mark journalists could get all their friends' awards, which is basically what it is today. So there was at least a modicum of credibility to all this, even if I never personally took wrestling awards all that seriously. But I'll try to rattle off some categories here, along with the names that were voted on. The 1987 Inspirational Wrestler of the Year Award that went to Nikita Koloff. And it was nice what they did here. After Nikita came out and accepted the award, he mentioned that among the many inspirational partners and friends he's come across in this sport, There's one man that stands above everybody else. Magnum TA. So Nikita actually dedicated that moment to Magnum, his longtime rival and good friend that we've seen unfold and develop over the last couple years. And it was a great moment here. Good to see Magnum on camera, even though he was still visibly limping there. You could tell he was still not at 100%. A year and a half past the accident. But he still had that glowing smile. And that's always the charm of Magnum. The kind of on-screen personality he was. Just a super down-to-earth guy that everybody could relate to. Then we had the Most Popular Wrestler of the Year award, which of course went to Dusty. Sure. Again, it's all semantics when you get into subjective categories like that. Most popular, most over. It's like, okay, fine, but who defines what the word popular means? Like, popular in terms of what? The most cheers? The biggest draw? The biggest reactions from all the major markets? Again, it's why I always have a hard time taking wrestling award ceremonies seriously. The Most Hated Wrestler of 1987. That award went to Ric Flair. And at that point, I just called bullshit. I'm like, are you kidding? Are these people deaf? Most hated? Guy was fucking more over than half the babyface locker room in the Mid-Atlantic region. What do you mean most hated? Again, try not to get hung up on it because I know it doesn't matter. It's fake. But I still call bullshit. And then we had the Tag Team of the Year award. Most people, I think, know this one like the back of their hand, but just in case you don't, for whatever reason. Yes, the award went to the Midnight Express. And this was fantastic. One of the best Stan Lane promos I think I've ever heard. As he's standing there fake shedding a tear, he goes, "There are two very special people in this world that made this moment possible. And those two men are Beautiful Bobby and Sweet Stan." I was like, hell yeah, baby. Work that fucking gimmick. You don't break kayfabe. Especially for these phony baloney awards. Accept the award as heels. Be a dick. Shove it back into people's faces afterwards. That's how you do it. Corny taught them well. Now, again, these were not all the categories. These were just a hand-select group of them. I don't think they would have had time to cover every single one in a 2-hour program. But, and it was cool to see them break up the show a little bit with this presentation. I mean, up to this point, it was one of the few redeeming qualities about the entire 90-minute show this week. Because then we had another half hour of lather, rinse, repeat squash promo stuff. And the boring trend continued. Warlord beat Larry Stevens with a running power slam in short order. It was almost a carbon copy of the Barbarian squash I just reviewed. Nothing to it. Just a bunch of power moves. Then we came back for a VTR, showing Luger working a squash on the Sunday syndicated programming. And then after he won, they showed a promo where he promised to knock all the horsemen off the pedestal. Then he flexed at the camera. The show fucking sucked, by the way. If I didn't mention that already. Yeah, the show was terrible. Man, even the Dick Murdoch promo didn't do anything for me. Oh, not just the promo and the match. That's when you know shit's really bad. When Captain Redneck can't even bring a smile to my face. I don't even know who he wrestled this week. Ricky Nelson, I think it was. I mean, the story with this one was Jim Cornette accompanying him to ringside. Now, remember, they're working the story on TV where Murdoch is collecting a bounty to take out Dusty. Guess it's only fitting that JC would have a hand in making sure Murdoch got possession of the money. At this point, there was no mention of Big Bubba, and he was nowhere to be seen this week. So I believe he had already left Crockett by this point. So now Corny's got a new bodyguard behind him. Yeah, that was the thing that happened this week. Murdoch won with a brainbuster. Then he and Corny got to do a promo afterwards, which, well, I do have to admit, it was pretty amazing. Most of it was Cornette explaining the backstory of how he aligned with Murdoch, telling him that the $50,000 bounty came to light because of Mama Cornette. So all Captain Redneck has to do is take out Dusty for good, and the money is his. And that was all well and good. But then Murdoch started going into one of his crazy redneck tirades. He cranked this baby up from like a 5 to a 10. The most incoherent Southern slur you could possibly think of. While Murdoch's talking about his history with Dusty, the roads they used to travel up and down, the bars they would pick fights at, blah, blah. Of course, Murdoch has to point out the fact that he started most of those fights, because Dusty was a putz. And the longer the promo goes, the more irrational it becomes, to the point where I wasn't even sure Murdoch was using the English language by the time he finished. Plugged the Bunkhouse Stampede, plugged a bunch of live dates. I could literally see the froth beginning to form on Murdoch's lower lip, like spit flying in every which direction. This is where I noted, if there is one reason to ever justify somebody wearing a face diaper in public, it's Dick Murdoch. I would willingly put myself in a room with 15 people that tested positive for CV-19 without a mask before I ever put myself in a room maskless where Dick Murdoch was screaming obscenities. Which one will get you sick faster? I'm willing to bet on Dick Murdoch. God rest his soul. He's a fucking maniac. But his promos were something else. If only half the people in today's business had that much passion. I mean, he made Corny look reasonably calm by comparison. So then we had the Road Warriors killing a couple dudes in quick succession. Speaking of crazy and irrational behavior, David Crockett said it all. You don't have to say anything. Hello, goodbye, and good night. Whoever these job guys were, I think it was the last time they ever stepped foot in a wrestling ring ever again. And, well, then there was the promo, which was equally as intense as the match. And as per usual with a lot of Road Warrior promos, Animal's the sound one of the two, because then they let Hawk get on the microphone, and it's all hands on deck. You never know what weird, strange things are going to come out of that guy's mouth. And on the television program filled with nothing but sexual innuendos this week, Hawk outright said here, while the PWI journalists are out there making fun of the Road Warriors for being too soft, there's only one thing on the Road Warriors' entire bodies that's soft. And it ain't soft all the time, if you know what I mean. Cock jokes. Sorry, a little bit of phlegm in the throat there. Then he followed it up by telling Ric Flair that when Hawk and Animal get in the ring with him, it's going to be a hard night all night long. That was a quote. People, I just want to make this known very publicly right now. I am not a very sexual dude. I don't look for excuses to come on here and make penis jokes. They're funny, but I'm not trying to be obnoxious about it. This entire fucking program this week was one giant pornography tease. I'm not kidding. We had grown-ass adults all over this fucking show making dick jokes nonstop. This is where we've come to in 1988 with Crockett Promotions. When people ask, what led to the Turner buyout in September that year? Everyone's talking about all the financial records and business being in the hole. Dude, look at the fucking show. It is nothing but constant sex jokes for the entire 2 hours. Huck was literally on live national television talking about getting his dick hard. The hell you think was going to happen? Why the fuck would Ted Turner want any part of it? That's where the real questions come into play. Then we had a quick Rock and Roll Express promo where it is confirmed Robert Gibson had not left the company yet. He was still hanging on by a thread alongside Ricky Morton. They did a promo hyping up something with the Sheepherders in a feud that I'm pretty sure never gets off the ground because the Rock and Roll are pretty much out of the company by the end of January. Not to play spoiler. Then we go back to the ring briefly for the Sheepherders versus Mike Jackson and the Italian Stallion. God, after that fucking Raw segment I just watched last week with the Sheepherders and Howard Finkel, dude, I'm like half tempted to never watch a Sheepherders match again in my life. Thankfully, this is on the short side, and it was relatively harmless, per Butch and Luke standards. They pinned Mike Jackson with a double gut buster in about 2 minutes. Yeah, so much for that Mike Jackson push at the tail end of 87, right? What was he, the Alabama junior heavyweight champion? Yeah, he's back to being a jag on the roster again. And then we close things out with the most baffling, mind-boggling Sheepherders promo of all time. Dude, watching these guys do promos back in the day, it is like a real-life promo class in and of itself. You know, it's Luke doing most of the talking, and Butch would randomly interject by basically repeating half of what Luke said. Meanwhile, Johnny Ace is in the background, looking blank and confused like he always does. I have no fucking clue what they said for half the promo. They're just talking over each other constantly. All I remember is Luke called out the Rock and Roll Express. He said they don't like long hair punk rockers. Meanwhile, there's fucking Johnny Ace standing 2 inches behind them, rocking a bleach blonde mullet. They also called Ricky and Robert Yankees, so they would look like dried up octopi when the Sheepherders got through with them. This was inexplicably horrible, yet I couldn't take my eyes off of it. I think I now see why Vince wanted to get a hold of him. He knew exactly what he was going to do with these goofballs the moment he signed them to a contract. And honestly, he really didn't change much about the gimmick, except turning them face and then having them lick people in the crowd. What a gimmick. And what a fucking horrible show this was. Good God. I thought it would never end. Now, this might go down as one of the worst TV episodes in Crockett history. But beyond the fact that nothing of substance happened on the entire show, when you factor in all the inappropriate dick jokes up and down the card, I think this was the week where they just threw their hands up and said, fuck it, do whatever you want. Just don't get us kicked off the air. I don't know how they didn't. Awful television. Couple moments of clarity here and there, but the remainder of the program this week was just dreck. And we are off for a new set of tapings here on Midsouth. Last week was the Year in Review special for all these standout moments in 82. And by that, I mean basically highlighting the last 3 months of content. But this week we were back to our regularly scheduled programming. And I'll tell you what, man. Bill Watts, he was coming out of the bullpen swinging this week. Firing shots at those good old nasty Freebirds. Now, of course, as we all know, in our coverage of world-class championship wrestling, our journey basically starting all the way back from Christmas Star Wars 1982, the infamous night the Freebirds turned heel on the Von Erichs, and Gordy slammed the cage door into Kerry's head. One of the most popular angles of the entire 1980s timeline in wrestling. And because it had just happened, factoring in we're in 1983 territory here with Mid-South footage, it was fresh on everybody's minds. So Bill Watts chimed in with his thoughts on the matter. And, well, he definitely wasn't holding back his opinions. I actually remember this little promo he cut on the Freebirds here, explaining how he does not believe that men can change their colors. Watts always believed that people are who they are. And we all saw the Freebirds demonstrate the kind of sissy men they are in Dallas that night. He starts going into a tirade about how Watts never liked Hayes. He never trusted him. He's the kind of guy Watts would have had fun slapping over and over again just to make an example out of him. The kind of guy that grows his hair long because he can't figure out what gender he wants to identify as. Now, of course, I'm laughing my ass off the entire time Watts is calling Hayes a she-male, basically. At the same time, in the back of my mind, I'm like, this totally wouldn't fly in 2024. But it is kind of funny. Like, can you imagine one of the WWE commentators making fun of Pretty Deadly the same way? Calling them suspect sissies and, you know, talking about how they like to spend more time dressing like women than fighting like grown men. I mean, I can do it, but I'm not on national cable television having to deal with soft network executives. This is one of those things where you look back and realize how culture has changed so much. And even if we all know the whole thing's a work, and Watts never actually felt that way about them, the idea that he would even bring this up on commentary here, well, it goes to show just how different times were back then. So that was all a great start to the program. And again, you know, there was a reason they called it the cage shot heard around the world. Everyone was talking about that incident at the time. Be it in Mid-South, Florida, Memphis, Minneapolis. All the major territories were either showing clips of that angle or, at the very least, talking about it, if they weren't able to obtain the footage. And they kind of segued into the talk about Mr. Wrestling 2. He had done an interview with Reeser Bowden earlier in the day. And they were going over the last few weeks of television, mainly focusing on the situation that occurred right before Christmas week. Kamal had wrestled a squash that week against a masked jobber. And after he won, he was trying to go after the guy's mask, which closely resembled Wrestling 2's mask. And as we know, the story with Wrestling 2 is that someone had been going around defaming his property, including all the masks. And we all remember how it played out. Wrestling 2 tried to go after General Akbar, Friday, and Kamala. He ended up getting laid out by a big splash, which ended up taking him out of the match he was scheduled to wrestle later on. It was a loser leaves Mid-South match, with him and Stagger Lee set to face the Rat Pack. And Mr. Olympia had taken Wrestling 2's place in that match, subsequently taken the fall, which now outed him from the territory for 90 days. And we really haven't heard Wrestling 2 speak on the matter, but he explains that he feels horrible about what happened. But he also has unresolved business to deal with Kamala and his gang of clowns. I think he actually referred to Friday here as a, quote, safari jerk, which was amusing. But that is where we stand with Wrestling 2 right now. Conspicuously, he also mentioned that he was not receiving threatening letters anymore. Perhaps because the mystery had been solved, and it was Kamala and Akbar going after Wrestling 2 the whole time. Or perhaps there's more to the story. They also took a minute here to re-air the Tony Atlas bench press clip from the Irish McNeil Boys Club a while back, with JYD and Stagger Lee conveniently standing in the same room at the same time. And there were basically two developing stories that happened here. Number one was the dog not letting Watts interview Stagger Lee, and then cracking the jokes about how Lee used to beat up Dog as a kid and steal his milk money. And the other was Atlas at the time setting the bench press record for 550 pounds, which I believe has long since been broken by now. And I believe they had shot this shortly before Hacksaw Duggan had done the push-up challenge to Atlas on TV, because this was right when Atlas had shown up in the territory and they were heavily plugging the whole bench press record stuff. And we've talked about that clip a dozen or so times now, so if you would like the full analysis breakdown, just go listen to my Mid-South reviews we did back in October and November of last year. So then we get the first match of the week. It is Tom Renesto Jr. taking on the returning Dr. Death Steve Williams, who's about a year or so into the business by this point. And God, was he greener than goose shit. I can't remember if I talked about Dr. Death training under Bill Watts' tutelage when he was first breaking into the business about a year ago. I think he actually started in Mid-South, if I'm correct. And obviously he had been gone for a while doing football throughout most of '82. So this is our first look at Dr. Death in the Mid-South region. A lot of football talk here from Bill Watts, most of which went over my head. I do remember Watts mentioning John Tenta at one point, which is a cool little plug. Obviously, people better know him as the Earthquake. And he had not debuted in wrestling by this point, so that was a nice little Easter egg. Again, Steve is super green here, very young, but what's that old cliche people talk about? He was a puppy with big paws. And he basically stayed put in the territory up to the UWF buyout in '87. Obviously before going to Crockett Promotions and then later WCW. He dabbled a little bit in All Japan in the 90s. There was the brief WWF stint, which was a catastrophe. I mean, damn near ended his professional in-ring career, having to participate in that stupid fucking Brawl for All tournament. Not trying to make this a Dr. Death career overview. I don't know how much I have or haven't talked about during our Crockett reviews. I just kind of assume most people know Dr. Death's background, but I mean, for the people that don't, it's always a good refresher to kind of talk about it here on the channel. I mean, that's the purpose of doing these classic reviews. You know, Steve Williams had been around for the last several months, but a lot of the stuff still predates the Varsity Club business, and we'll be seeing plenty more of Steve on Mid-South in years to come. You could effectively call this his home turf. I mean, he was basically grandfathered into the territory, and he'll be an integral talent on this program in years to come. Then we had Marty Lundy versus another returning face to the Mid-South territory, Dick Murdoch. And no, this was not raging redneck spitting at the camera lens talking about how much he despises Dusty Rhodes Dick Murdoch. This was Marine Corps, saluting the fans, top babyface Dick Murdoch. Quite the contrast. And, it was funny, I wrote this down, not as a shot at Murdoch, but just to point out how great AA was, even when he was being used as an underneath guy here in Mid-South. This actually wound up accidentally being more of a showcase piece for Arn. Because even though Murdoch was the one they were putting over here, AA kind of stole the show. Getting the jump start on Murdoch before the opening bell, watching him be the aggressive, angry Arn that resembled something you would see in the Horsemen from like 85 to 88. It's one of those matches where I spend more time watching Arn's performance than Murdoch's. And I'll concede, babyface Dick Murdoch was only going to carry so much weight. I still prefer him being the raging lunatic heel on camera. But, man, Arn had a great showing here. He had the facials down. It was working that classic heel Arn style. And, props to Murdoch for letting him get so much offense in. You could tell Murdoch thought highly of him. They did sort of botch the brainbuster finish. Yeah, I don't know if maybe Murdoch just didn't have a firm grip on him, or maybe Arn sandbagged him a little bit. I mean, he got AA up, but it was a valiant struggle. Again, though, man, this all goes back to that conversation I had last week about the talent pool around this time. So many of these underneath or middle of the card guys became huge stars in their own right from around this period. Even if all of them didn't end up becoming world champion, the reality is, I'm watching Arn Anderson versus Dick Murdoch. Now, in 1983, maybe that wasn't such a huge deal. Seeing it through the lens of 1987 or 1998, it's a pretty big fucking deal. Then we had Kamala going over Art Cruz in pretty quick succession. Cruz was a recurring job guy in the Mid-South territory in this time. I think we saw him show up a few times in Dallas, too. He may have done some stuff in the Central States area, too, in the undercard at one point. Can't recall. Didn't have a very long career, but, he bounced around and got to work with some good talent throughout the 80s. Kamala killed him in about 20 seconds, though. There really wasn't much to it. Staying on the subject of Kamala and General Akbar, though, when we come back from break, Akbar was in the ring with Gary Hart and the Great Kabuki. Another Dallas crossover from around this period. Also one of Gary's original gimmick creations. He developed the whole persona, gave him the backstory and everything. Now, we had already gone through and reviewed a lot of the Kabuki work in World Class throughout 82 and 83. And when Hart was still heavily involved with the booking and the promotion, they were doing the alliance on TV with H&H Enterprises plus Akbar's Devastation Inc. And again, this is tying storylines and cross-promoting things from different territories around that time. We covered this in the World Class log, but it's been a hot minute. I'd be surprised if people actually remember the whole thing. Without directly reverting to spoilers, I will say this is just when they were planting the seeds for the Akbar-Hart alliance, centering everything around money and the fact that Hart knew Akbar was a cash cow in the wrestling industry, so he wanted to talk business with him after Kabuki's match and see if they can get that offer going. And Kabuki was another talent that worked so many different places over the years. I mean, it's really hard to track the dates of where he was at specific moments. At this point, I think he was mostly bouncing back between Mid-South and Dallas. This might have been his first appearance in Mid-South, now that I'm thinking about it. I think Bill Watts mentioned it. Still aligned with Gary Hart. Still a heel. Yeah, some of the details are coming back to me as I'm reflecting here. He had his match with Tim Horner this week. And of course, the thing that made Kabuki's matches unique, aside from the martial arts offense, the mist blowing spot that became synonymous to the Kabuki gimmick. And not just blowing the mist in the face, but like the color of the mist and how that would have a direct impact on the way guys would sell it. Sometimes it was green, sometimes red. I think the red mist was supposed to be more lethal or toxic. He would only break that one out on special occasions. Again, suspension of disbelief is everything when you look into something like that. I mean, the gimmick itself is pretty much the inspiration for when Muta would popularize it in the States years later. And of course, all the jabronis that try to replicate it after the fact. Like these days, now we're even seeing the Japanese girls doing it on WWE. I really like Kabuki's work in Dallas, though. I thoroughly enjoyed going over that timeline. The feud with the Von Erichs. The stuff with Bruiser Brody when he was still down there. That was great. And again, it's cool reflecting back to this period and remembering all the stuff we covered from other territories around that same time. Not everything immediately springs to mind when I mention it, but I'll never forget Kabuki's work. He was a mainstay in Dallas for years up to that point. And I think he comes back at some point in 85, if I'm not mistaken, as a babyface, which I don't remember for the life of me. You know what else I don't remember? Was Bruno Sammartino Jr. wrestling in Mid-South. Oh, that poor fucker. Now, of course, I think everybody knows Bruno's son wrestled professionally at one point in time. Notice how I say wrestled. I did not say wrestled well. Oh no, he wrestled. That is about the highest praise I can give him. I think he's remembered better for wrestling as David Sammartino as opposed to Bruno Sammartino Jr. I mean, he had used both names interchangeably over the years, but David is the one that people often remember first. Obviously, the big career highlight for him was probably the Mania match at MSG with Brutus Beefcake when he had his dad accompany him to ringside. After that point, his career was pretty much one steady decline. I'm not going to get too personal here for regional purposes, but let's just say I may or may not know some people that were close with David Sammartino growing up. Here is what I may or may not have been informed of. Nice guy. Good athlete. Probably should have taken his dad's advice to pursue a different line of work. And we will just leave it at that. So this match, now that I've spent the last 2 minutes talking about the least important talent involved, it is David and Buddy Landell going up against Ted DiBiase and Matt Bourne of the Rat Pack. This is still prelim Buddy, predating the bleach blonde mullet phase. He looks like every generic job guy throughout the 80s. All relative joking aside, it was a pretty good tag match. They actually let Buddy and David get in a lot of offense here, which I was kind of surprised to see. Gave Watts some time to mention a few other story-related items. The main one being his refusal to come out of retirement to defend the Brass Knucks Heavyweight Championship against Hacksaw Duggan, which was something they were previously pushing on TV. A lot of steady action back and forth. You know, babyfaces were looking like they were about to put away Bourne at the end. And then right as Alfred Neely was trying to hold back David and then send him to his corner, DiBiase had slipped on the loaded glove and then clocked Buddy in the corner. So the heels ended up going over by cheating. But they gave Buddy and David a lot here. And we're still about a year away from them giving Buddy that monster push on TV with Hacksaw Butch Reed. Then I think he would end up splitting his time between here and... was it Houston? And then he eventually went to Crockett in 85, and... well, we all know what happened there. It was more memorable than his run in 87 when he came back with Bill Dundee and then he was gone in like 2 months. I know he was in Memphis at one point. For the life of me, I can't remember the year. Was it 84? Or was that between the transition from his Mid-South to Mid-Atlantic run? I don't know my Memphis history like I should. Yeah, shame on me, I know. In any case, good match. David looked better than I remember him looking in a wrestling ring. Take that compliment as you wish. And then for our TV main event, it is Mr. Wrestling 2 versus Gorgeous Gino Hernandez. Wrestling 2 had an extra thick layer of athletic tape on his left knee this week. Must have been to reinforce the impact of the running knee lift. I would say everything here was moderately tame. Right up until the point Gino decided to slap Wrestling 2 in the face. And boy, did that light a fire under 2. If only You Fucked Up chants existed back in 1983. Those fans would have let Gino have it. It was good stuff, though. You know, Wrestling 2 did some shucking and jiving right before giving Gino a receipt. You know, rallied the people up there at the end with the 2 chants. And then right as Gino tried to cut off 2 and then come off the middle rope with a diving elbow, 2 rolled out of the way and then caught Gino with the knee lift for the 3. Oh, Gorgeous Gino. The guy never learns. He's too pompous. All those private jet rides and fine dining dates he'd gone on. He let it get to his head. Bitch slapping a ring veteran. The hell did he think was going to happen? But that rounded out a pretty great episode of Midsouth this week. A lot of new faces showing up on the scene. I think I spent more time focusing on the actual names than I did the matches. But as I mentioned before, 1983 is a very special year for me going back and watching these Mid-South clips. Now, I had already shared my story of when I first purchased the network subscription. When that Mid-South library dropped, it was all over that shit like a fly. Binge watching the fuck out of virtually the entire library. I don't know if I made it all the way through the end of 86, early 87. But I watched a good chunk of it. So a lot of this is new familiar territory for me. Now I'm just kind of revisiting it and seeing the stuff I remember versus the stuff I don't. But hopefully it's fun for the people listening. Again, I never purport to be an expert on this stuff. But, I'm just trying to keep my passion alive for something that I've been clinging on to since I was like 4 years old. But I'll get off my soapbox now. Let's talk about world class. the second week of our Christmas 84 Star Wars taping, or tapings, plural. We were kind of off to a rocky start last week. Even the Ric Flair Kerry Von Erich World title match was missing something. Not exactly sure what that something was, but it just really didn't stand out like a lot of previous Kerry Flair title matches. It was very forgettable. There was also that complete mess of a tornado tag match where half the fucking roster got banned from the territory by the time it was over. I'm not even going to dig into all that again. Like, go listen to last week's show if you want to hear the full report. It took me at least 10 minutes to get through that complete cluster of a segment. Oh, we can't forget this too. The debut of Billy Jack Haynes in a tag match with Jake Roberts and Gino Hernandez, teaming with Mike Von Erich of all people. And they actually aired that segment as a quick epilogue this week. Or not an epilogue. What the hell do they call them? Now I'm blanking out on the terminology. An encore. That's what it was. But again, since we talked about that last week, we'll go ahead and start our review with the new content proper. Kicking it off with Rip Oliver versus the Iceman, King Parsons. First time we're getting a look at Rip Oliver in Dallas. I can't remember if he had already debuted later in '84, but pretty sure this is the first time we're seeing him in a televised capacity. And this also proceeded when Cornette wound up managing him later on. Can't remember the timeline for that either. I know it's sometime in early '85. I guess you could call this a basic showcase piece to get Rip over and establish him with the Dallas audience. Obviously, it's not going to be a squash, though, because they're booking him with the Iceman. It's going to be a fairly competitive match. And for the most part, it was. Wasn't the most exhilarating thing from start to finish, but I think they gave Rip enough here to get over his heel persona with the crowd. It was really solid work with both guys trading offense back and forth. And the finish was kind of interesting. They essentially put Rip over clean, despite him being a heel. And the spot was the Iceman trying to charge Oliver in the corner with a running shoulder block, but Oliver moved out of the way, so the Iceman accidentally posted himself. And while he was favoring the shoulder, Oliver basically capitalized and got on top of him for the 3 count. And they did the thing where the Iceman had to kick out at like 3.1 just to make it kind of look like he was trying to fight out of it. But they didn't change the finish on the fly or wave off the call, do a finish reversal. No. Oliver got the clean pin. 1, 2, 3. And the Iceman was down selling it after the match. Crowd didn't like the end result, but what can you do? Yeah, I think Rip stays with World Class through most of '85 before the WWF run. I can never recall what year he actually went there. Was it '87? It had to have been around that time because he had already finished up the run in Portland by then. I would say it was a fine start to the program. And then we go to our so-called featured bout for this week's Star Wars taping. Well, one of 2 featured bouts. Been hyping this one up for a while. Now we finally get to see it and talk about it. It is the American Heavyweight Tag Team Championship match, featuring the Fantastics defending against the Midnight Express. And I know we're jumping through all kinds of timelines here during our classic review series, so it might be worth mentioning this for anybody not aware. We are in 1985 here, So the Midnight's team at this point was comprised of Beautiful Bobby and Loverboy Dennis. Sweet Stan, I believe, was still working in Memphis by this point, right? I know he had been doing stuff down in Florida, too, around that same time. But it obviously predates when they replaced Dennis with Stan and Crockett Promotions in early 87 because of, everything that went down. So yes, it is Bobby, Dennis, and Cornette's first match in Dallas, challenging for the American Tag Titles. I'm sure all the avid listeners of Cornette's podcast have heard the countless tales about the pit stop world-class run right before they signed with Jim Crockett later that year. They had just finished up with Midsouth, and as a favor to Bill Watts, before officially putting pen to paper with Crockett, he asked if they would be willing to go down to Dallas to work for Fritz and keep that partnership going with Mid-South and World Class. And, well, of course, and if you get Corny's perspective on the matter, his summation of the run would be a giant missed opportunity. I'll go into the juicy insider stuff in a minute. But, well, let me talk about the match first and break down what happened. You knew you were in for something unique when Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers were throwing candy canes into the crowd from their top hats. Guess we needed to establish who the baby faces and heels were. I also very much enjoyed Cornette's creepy stare into the camera right before they rang the bell. Part of it was like, you could tell this guy so badly wanted to cut a promo. But, well, as we'll see throughout the Midnight short-lived run in Dallas, promo time was not something they accentuated for these guys, which almost completely defeats the purpose of Jim even being there, because that was his whole shtick. And they were intentionally withholding it from him. Now, obviously, the Midnight's Fantastic program goes back to Mid-South the year prior, so Mercer was sure to point out the lack of love lost between the two opposing parties. You know, watching it in a vacuum without the contextual knowledge about how lame the Midnight's run was in Dallas, I can't take away from it. It's a great tag match. Oh, God. Yeah, that comment was sponsored by Tony Khan. No, but seriously, man, anybody that has seen the Midnights versus the Fantastics, whatever territory we're referring to, the chemistry of those guys was always off the charts. It's the perfect babyface heel combination. Corny would probably tell you, out of the 750 career matches the Midnights had with the Fantastics over the years, probably 740 of them were better than this one. Maybe it's true. Maybe not. It's all perception. But I love this match, though. Between the brilliant heel work of Bobby and Dennis throughout, like all the double teaming they did behind Bronco's back, the crowd was eating it up the whole time. There was so much heat for this match. And Tommy and Bobby were excellent babyfaces in peril. They stayed on Tommy for large chunks of the match, you know, really milking the heat session with the Midnights, trying to keep Tommy isolated in the corner. And that set up the hot tag for Bobby later on, which is awesome. Tommy Rogers pulled out a double sunset roll through before leaping out for the tag. Then from there, it's Fulton, a house of fire. You know, crowds practically creaming themselves the moment he hits the ring and starts running wild on Ian and Condrey. And they do the great setup for the Irish whip spot off the ropes. Fulton fires back, catches Ian and Condrey with a crossbody attack. While Fulton had Eaton pinned down, Rogers sneaks in and holds Condrey's foot, preventing him from breaking up the pin attempt. And then we get one of the most over-dramatic Jim Cornette moments of all time. He hits the ring like a deranged lunatic, starts getting into Bronco's face about the Fantastics using the tights to cheat. Keep in mind, he is legitimately leaping into the air, stomping his feet like a pouting toddler, just reading Bronco the Riot Act. And I think the exact quote from Bill Mercer here to describe Cornette's tantrum, he goes, "And Jim Cornette acting like a spoiled toddler." Quite the understatement. See, I was just thinking, nah, that's just Jim being a defiant heel manager. Nothing out of the ordinary there. And then as soon as he took the back bump and started kicking his feet in the air, shaking his fists, and screaming, that is when I said, oh no, he's definitely acting like a defiant toddler. And then to make matters better, just to make sure everybody knew how awesome the Midnights were, he then, in refusing to accept the finish decision, raises Bobby and Dennis's arms and goes, "We're the winners." So that was pretty amazing. Again, man, the story of the Midnight Express in Dallas is such a weird phenomenon. And you're always going to hear varying opinions on it. Were they a missed opportunity? Did Fritz in the office not see the same star power in the Midnights as, say, a Dusty Rhodes or a Bill Watts did? It's a valid question. I mean, how in the hell we went almost an entire calendar year with the Von Erichs and the Midnights working under the same roof? Not one time did they ever cross paths together in a wrestling ring? You would think that would be the ultimate dream match scenario. Like, how in the hell do you not book the Midnights in a program with the Von Erichs? I don't know. One of the biggest mysteries that even Jim himself could not document in his 40th year Midnight's anniversary scrapbook. Truthfully, the only man that might know the answer to that is Fritz. And unfortunately, he's not around anymore to give a definitive answer. But we'll be seeing plenty more of the Midnights in Dallas throughout '85. They had quite the run. And we will just leave the conversation at that for the time being. But that led to our final match in the card, the second featured bout. Now, prior to this, they had already aired a little highlight reel of the Kevin Von Erich Chris Adams timeline, dating all the way back to the incident on TV where Stella Mae French had accidentally cost Adams a match with Roberts and Hernandez. At the time, he had been teaming with Kevin. And there was a shoving match and a post-match angle, which basically resulted in Kevin smacking Gary Hart. Then Adams superkicked Kevin and initiated the heel turn from there. And then we had all the subsequent angles where Adams had given Kevin the chair shot back at the Cotton Bowl event, which sent Kevin to a hospital to have his head stitched up. A lot of moving parts in this storyline. And technically, we've already seen these two wrestle once before, but I guess you could call that more of an angle. I believe Chris won that on a technicality, but the bigger picture there was Kevin getting a dose of revenge by hitting Chris with a chair and then leaving him a bloody mess. So we are now at the point where this match needs to be contested under the confines of a lumberjack match so that nobody could exit the ring of their own volition. I believe it was also no disqualification. And they had pretty much the whole locker room out there, baby faces and heels alike. Now, at the time they rang the bell to start it, I think they only had 10 minutes left in the show. Didn't give them a whole lot of time to work with, but I mean, they were pretty much at each other's throats right from the opening bell. So they probably didn't need a whole lot of time to get over the story of the match. They were just kind of throwing soup bones back and forth for a while. We had the occasional dump spot out to the floor where the guy would immediately get thrown back in. I mean, generally, I would say the lumberjack stipulation wasn't even all that significant. They had Adams get a little bit of heat on Kevin toward the midway point, but honestly, there just wasn't a whole lot to say about the action. Now, the finish was a little wonky, and I'm not entirely sure if this was a premeditated spot. So in the last couple minutes, they have Adams hit Kevin with a pile driver, and then he goes up top to try to do some big dive spot or whatever he was going for. And then seemingly out of nowhere, Kevin just pops back up to his feet, no-sells the pile driver entirely. And I think the idea was that he was supposed to press slam Adams off the top rope. What happened instead was Kevin kind of lost his grip on Adams near the ropes. Adams sort of landed throat first on the top rope and then basically melted into a puddle. And both men are down for a minute. Time goes by. They're just kind of laying there. And then Kevin crawls over on Adams and pins him flat. And it was weird because Adams had his foot pretty close to the ropes where if he wanted to, he could have just literally moved his left foot 2 inches to the left. Would have easily been able to break up the pinfall. So Kevin wins. Then about 30 seconds later, Adams is back up on his feet trying to lay out Kevin with his boot while Kevin has Gary trapped in the corner. And then Mike runs in and sends the heels packing. During their escape route, Adams and Hart were nearly killed by a fan who jumped the safety rope in the front row. There was also a very angry elderly gentleman near the aisleway who was all up in Chris's face. I would not have been surprised if he was concealing. This was not a Texan you would want to fuck with in public. Thankfully, no one died. But it was just a very strange match. It wasn't bad. Crowd was super into it. The finish, though, was just kind of, like I said, very flat. Like even Kevin going over didn't really generate the pop like it should have. It was more like a delayed reaction where once the people finally realized Kevin won, they were like, oh, holy shit, he won. But that was that. Still on general principle, show was miles better than last week's taping block. Now, this one had a special event pay-per-view vibe when it was over. Solid opening prelim match, great middle-of-the-card tag match with two top tag teams in their own right, and a really hot main event with two singles guys to settle a score over a long-standing rivalry. And that's the core world-class model that's kind of been missing throughout a lot of those 84 programs. So it was good to see a little bit of a turnaround this week. Now, next time they will be back to their normal schedule. It'll be a brand new set of tapings back at the Sportatorium, featuring a couple new roster additions, so that'll be nice. We will get to recount the Midnight Express in Dallas. And we will see if Jim Cornette was right. Let's test that confirmation bias. Was their run one giant popcorn fart? Or is he not giving him enough credit? Time will tell. But that'll wrap things up for this program. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Again, make sure you stop by on Monday as we'll be going down the Retro Raw, Retro NXT, and WWE SmackDown report. And a couple weeks after that, we'll resume with the Royal Rumble. Two Royal Rumble reviews, actually. We got the 95 Rumble as well as the upcoming one. So we'll try to see how we fit that in our window of availability. I'll make time. I promise. All right. Thanks everybody for watching. Take care. Peace out.